Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to grecochess, the YouTube channel of chess. In previous videos, we were presenting, to be more exact, games of the final round of the Underwater Moonlight tournament. That is, in the final round, out of the 81 players that started the tournament, we are down to 6 finalists, and after withdrawal of one of them, we have 5 that continue fighting for the trophy. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed an interview we had with Jay Kleinman, the tournament director of the Queen's Chess Club, a club that I have participated in many of their tournaments. This is part of a series of videos commemorating the first anniversary of my channel. We hope to have more interviews coming later. We're planning to have more interviews. But for now, we'll continue covering the final round of the Underwater Moonlight tournament. We have already covered, if I counted correctly, 8 out of the 20 games among the 5 participants. And since then, 2 more have been concluded, and we are going to present them as they conclude. In this video, we'll cover the 9th one, and in the next video, we'll cover the 10th one. And let's see what do we have for now for this video. Let me share the screen with you. And here we are. With the white pieces is Team Rocket. Team Rocket has not concluded yet any of the final games, other of course than the 2 that everybody won against the play that withdrew. Team Rocket from Australia and is facing TsiNanFu from Greenland. TsiNanFu, we saw this player losing 2 games from PG74 in the previous videos. Once again, I need to mention that I'm going to display only part of the screen, the part of the chessboard, to avoid spoiling the happenings in the game. The rest of the screen would have shown you the next moves and the final results. Also, you are going to notice that the starting position you see here is not the one that we are used to in chess games, because this is what is called a thematic tournament. Players, by accepting to participate, have agreed to start from this position. What else are we going to notice? The ratings. Team Rocket from Australia has 1631. TsiNanFu from Greenland has 1483, which means that Team Rocket should be the favorite, but too many surprises have happened to trust these ratings too much. And here you're going to see this bar that is going to show who does the computer think is doing better. We are starting with 0.0. Both players have at the same point. They start on an equal basis. And Steam Rocket with the white pieces is going to continue, and no surprise here, if you have pushed your pawn from g2 to g3, as players have agreed to do according to the rules of the thematic tournament, what is the next move? Fianchetto. Bishop goes to g2. You see the little booklet that indicates that this is a book move, meaning move that has been discussed and analyzed in opening theory. No surprise, should not come to any surprise to the opponents. And black TsiNanFu replies with another book move, pawn to c6. The goal of that is to close the diagonal, because you saw that after bishop went to g2, the bishop exerts pressure on the entire diagonal from h1 to a8, and if the knight from f3 moves anywhere and the diagonal is not covered, then the rook on a8 is in danger. And let's continue. Next move for Steam Rocket, queen goes to c2. Not book move, but you see the little star that says it's the best possible move for white. Pawn to d5 for TsiNanFu wants to block the diagonal even more. 2 pawns on c6 and d5. In addition to the knight on f3, stop the bishop from g2 taking the rook on a8. Knight to e5 for Steam Rocket. Bishop to b7, TsiNanFu. TsiNanFu basically says, if you have your light colored bishop on this diagonal, the long diagonal, on g2, I'm also going to put mine on b7. So we are sharing the diagonal. Steam Rocket starts with a pawn to e3. Good moves the computer, and the comment of the coach says that's not a mistake, but it's not the best move either. And the best move being, of course, the knight to c3. You see the green arrow. That's what the green arrow means. It is made by the computer and indicates what they think is the best move. Arrows, if they are green, they are computer suggestions. If they are orange, they are made by me to discuss various topics. And now we continue. Short castling from TsiNanFu. We finished 10 moves, and let's look at the score. 0.0. If you look at the second decimal, White's Steam Rocket is leading by 0.05, which basically means nothing. Let's continue. Castling, also short castling for Steam Rocket. Knight to d7 from TsiNanFu. Develop the pieces. Knight to c3 from Steam Rocket. Of course, develop your pieces. I don't understand why the computer wants a bishop. The bishop has already been moved once. You don't want your pieces to be moved more than once unnecessarily in the opening. Maybe to control the other diagonal from a1 to h8. I can't see any other reason. Knight goes, let's see the move again. Exchange of knights. Knight to e5 from d7 to e5 for TsiNanFu wins the white knight, but the white knight, of course, excuse me, the white player will grab the black knight immediately, pawn from d4 to e5. The problem for white is that they doubled their e pawns, e2, e4. They are not yet isolated because of f3, but it's a weakness. You don't want unnecessarily to weaken your position, but that was the end result of the exchange of the knights. Now, of course, the first thing that TsiNanFu needs to do is save the knight from f6, and not too many squares to save. And TsiNanFu chooses the best one to d7, because by doing so also attacks the pawn on e5 that is unprotected. What is Team Rocket going to do? Exchange on d5. Inaccuracy is the computer. Computer wants immediately the pawn to go to f4, the green arrow. But at least you get a pawn. You don't lose material. Pawn from c6 to d5 for TsiNanFu has a nice pawn chain. f7, e65. And what will Steam Rocket do? The pawn on e5 is still under attack. Pawn to f4 for Steam Rockets. Protects the pawn, but opens this diagonal that leads towards the white king. No pawn protection. Can black exploit it? Let's see. You also have the pawn on e3. That is what is called a backwards pawn. There's no pawn on the d file to protect it, and on the f file, it's already passed on f4. So if attacked, only pieces can defend it, unless you can push it ahead of f4. Rook to c8 for TsiNanFu. He wants to achieve two things. First of all, controls the open file from c1 to c8. We call it open because there are no pawns there, but in addition, pins the knight on c3. If the knight on c3 moves, then the queen on c2 is lost. We finished 15 moves, and let's see what is the score. TsiNanFu is leading by 0.6, a very small advantage, but means nothing for now, but let's see what will happen later. Rook to c1 for Steam Rocket places the rook together with the queen, more control of the open c file, but computer thinks it's inaccuracy. That is what the question mark followed by exclamation point means. The code says that's not the right idea, and you have to look at the green arrow to figure out what is the right idea. Basically, what the computer wants is the queen to get out of the c file and unpin the knight. Bishop to a6 for TsiNanFu, that you can see clearly, attacks the rook on f1, and the rook has to move to e1 for Steam Rocket to save the rook. Computer would rather have it go to f2. The problem with f2 is that if there was no e3 pawn, the bishop would go to c5, pin, and win the rook, or at least the exchange. Rook to d. Now we said bishop goes to a3 from TsiNanFu and attacks the other rook on c1. So this has to move again. The two bishops, a6 and a3, are very powerful for TsiNanFu. Rook goes to d1, saves the rook. Knight to c5. TsiNanFu brings, in addition to the bishop, brings also the knight into the fray. Bishop to f1 for Steam Rocket. That wants to exchange bishop since TsiNanFu is the one pressing. It would be some relief for Steam Rocket to exchange the bishops. But will TsiNanFu agree to exchange them? Yes, he does, and computer thinks the best move because the alternative would be to move the bishop to b7 where it is blocked by d5. Rook takes back, of course. Computer would rather have the king take on f1, perhaps. And now TsiNanFu will place a knight on e4. Not a bad idea in principle to bring the knight further into Steam Rocket's territory, but computer thinks a mistake. Computer thinks the best, the comment, you see the green arrow says the bishop to go to b4, and the comment verbally says the better move was to increase the bishop scope by moving it to a better square. But let's see what is going to happen. The idea, of course, is that knight cannot take the knight because then the queen is lost. Oh, of course, if the queen takes the knight, then the pawn takes it. Also, now the knight on c3 is attacked twice, once by the rook from c8 and once by the knight on e4, but it's defended twice, once the bishop from d2 and once by the queen from c2. So currently the knight is barely saved. Add the queen on c7, for example, and if black would play another move, third move in a row, queen goes to c7, the knight is lost, or bishop goes to b4. But computer thinks a mistake. We're going to see if this is the case. But after 20 moves, what is the score? TsiNanFu is leading by 0.5. Let's continue. Queen to d3, great moves is a computer for Steam Rocket because now there is no pin and the knight on e4 is really under attack. How will TsiNanFu react? Take the bishop. Rook takes it back. Bishop to b4. Now the knight on c3 is attacked twice, both by the bishop from b4 and by the rook from c8, defended only once by the queen on d3, and if the knight disappears, then the rook on d2 is lost. But Steam Rocket is going to save the knight by sending the rook to c2. Computer would rather have the other rook go to c1, but it's a small difference. Queen to d7. Queen wants also to enter the fray, but I would say very slowly. Rook to c1, more protection. White has two rooks on the c file, c1 and c2. On the open c file, by the way, I emphasize open because open files are even more valuable for the rooks, and TsiNanFu has only one on c8. Rook goes to d8 for TsiNanFu. Queen to b5 for Steam Rocket. Best moves is the computer. We see the star wants to exchange the queens because if the queens are exchanged, you don't have to worry about the knight on c3. See, if queen takes, knight takes, rook takes, we finish. Let's start again. If queen takes, knight takes, rook takes, the rook, and rook from c1 takes on c2, and we finish the exchanges, the game is even, and white does not have to worry about all this pressure on the knight on c3. But will TsiNanFu comply? Nope. In fact, on c5, he's attacking the pawn on e3. And if black would play again, check on e3, and after king moves, also win the rook on c1. We finished 25 moves. Let's give a look at the score. 0.0. Let's look at the second decimal. 0.00. The game is exactly even after 25 moves. And let's see how it's going to continue now. It's going to become very, very exciting. I can't wait to see the conclusion of the game. Queen to e2 for Steam Rocket. Mistakes in the computer. Computer would rather have the exchange of the queens. What would happen? Let's see the queens are exchanged. Black has only one way, takes with the rook. Now let's first of all remove the other arrows. Queen takes queen, rook takes queen, and then what? Knight might go to a4 to attack the bishop, and it's nice to get rid of that and have a relatively weak pawn on c5 if there are exchanges. If the rooks continue chasing rooks, that's what the computer would prefer. And definitely not the queen to go back to e2. Pawn to d4 for TsiNanFu. Attacks the knight. Excellent as a computer. You see what's happening. If the pawn takes pawn, then bishop goes here, or queen can go here with a check. It's very, very dangerous, whether with the bishop, perhaps even better with the queen, because then there can be a follow-up with the queen protected by the bishop. But if the knight moves, then the pawn can attack. Oh, yeah, yeah. If the knight, let's say, moves, let's say, go to a4, just give an example. Pawn can go here, and we're talking about a fork. Both rook and queen are forked. Let's see how white is going to react. What is Team Rocket's reaction going to be? Takes a pawn on d4, bishop to d4 check. Yes, that's the best move on the computer, not the queen going there. King to f1. If only white could place a nice bishop, white light color bishop on b5, the queen would be, no, the knight would take it. I don't know what, but really there is a very weak diagonal that goes from a6 to f1. But let's see what TsiNanFu will play. Queen to b7. Mistakes as a computer, the code says that's an unfortunate error. Ideally, would have the bishop takes on c3. What would happen then? The knight is attacked 3 times by bishop, by rook, and by rook. No, I'm sorry. The knight is attacked once by the bishop and once by the rook. And it's defended once by the rook and second time by the rook. Yes, it's safe for now, but barely. So queen goes to b7. Computer would rather have the exchanges start taking place. Queen to e4 for Steam Rockets. Now wants to exchange on this diagonal. It would be great if they could exchange, because otherwise you're giving the black queen the control of the long diagonal. Not only it's a long one from a to h1, but there are no pawns there. Nothing else. So the queen had complete control of this diagonal. But now with the queen on e4, white is saying we need to exchange queens, but or you may want to leave your diagonal if that's what you prefer. And let's see what TsiNanFu prefers, to leave the diagonal queen to d7. Okay for the computer, but computer would rather have the queen go to a6 with a check. And then you have the queen on this diagonal, the bishop on this diagonal, and the white king doesn't have too many squares to go. Yes, it's not made yet, but it's under pressure. I said queen goes to d7, more protection to the bishop on d4. Let's see what's going to happen with Team Rockets. Knight to e2 attacks the bishop. It's attacked once and once twice. It's defended once and once twice, just barely defended. But TsiNanFu prefers to take the rook on c2. We finished 30 moves, and let's give a look at the score. Of course, white will take it back, either with the queen or with the rook. After 30 moves, TsiNanFu is leading by 0.3, barely ahead. The game is still even, and we are looking forward to a very exciting continuation. Let's see what's going to happen until the end. The dramatic conclusion. Steam Rocket takes on c2, bishop to c5, blocks the c file from c1 to c8. 31 moves, still TsiNanFu is ahead by 0.39 to be exact, meaning almost nothing. And now queen to c4 for Steam Rockets. And computer thinks a mistake. The code says the best option was to centralize the knight so it controls more squares. This permits the opponent to threaten checkmate. And you see that suddenly from 0.39, the advantage of TsiNanFu becomes 5.68. That is more than 14 times more. Now it's very important, assuming, of course, that TsiNanFu can find the correct continuation. Where is the checkmate? Checkmate would become immediately if TsiNanFu could magically send the queen from d7 to h1, which is not allowed. This is checkmate immediately. I hope you can see it because not sure. No, maybe if that happened, the knight could come to g1. Queen would take the knight. Knight goes to f2. Queen to e2. Queen goes to f2, and now this is mate. Not immediately, but in 3 moves it would come. But this is only if the queen could magically go to h1. Cannot go magically, so but it can go in 2 steps. For example, b7 or c6, the first, the next is h1. Let's see what is TsiNanFu going to do. Queen to c6, the first out of the steps. Exclamation point means a great move. This threatens to checkmate the king. Of course, if black would play again. And let's see how Team Rocket will defend, because clearly if TsiNanFu could play again, it's made in 3 moves. One, one, two, two, and three, and it's a mate. Queen f2, king e2, queen protected by the bishop on c5, and the rook on d8 controlling the entire d file. And of course, now Team Rocket has one last chance to defend. How can one defend it? Doesn't seem to be too easy, because you just cannot take the bishop, then you lose your queen. How can you control this square? If the queen cannot go to e4, because then it's going to be lost. If king goes, for example, to e1, the easiest, then clearly we have something very similar. Again, queen goes here, king goes. If king goes to e1, again it's checked from here. Again, the only legal move is here. Queen takes the knight. King may go here to e2, and queen goes to f2. It's a mate. Not too many easy ways to defend. Let's think of something else. The king cannot go anywhere else other than e1. And then knight go to d4 to block at least the d file. Then attack twice by the rook and the bishop, and it's defended only by the queen. Not so easy as that. It seems that TsiNanFu will win material in any case. Currently, the material is even. Both sides have 1 queen, 1 rook, 1 light piece, and 6 pawns. The pawn structures are very similar. No advantage there. Yes, a bishop usually is a little bit better than a knight, but where TsiNanFu is way much better is in what's called king safety. Look at TsiNanFu's king, protected by 3 pawns in front of it. Theoretically, there's a possibility of backrank mate, but there's no white, the rook or queen that can take advantage of this. While look at this white king, no pawns anywhere near. The nearest pawns are the h2 and g3 that you have to be a knight to be able to jump from the king to these pawns. This is a big advantage of TsiNanFu, not material, not pawn structure, it is king safety. And let's see what's going to happen now. The last chance for Team Rocket to stay the game, and knight goes to g1. Computer would rather have the knight go from e2 to d4. What's going to happen if the knight would go to e4? Let's try to guess what would happen. If the knight goes here, rook takes, and if queen takes, bishop takes, rook takes, and we're going to an ending where TsiNanFu has an extra bishop. But still, you never know. Plus, perhaps a threat of a back rank, although Yes, there is a threat of back rank, but TsiNanFu would have to move one of his pawns to save the checkmate. That is what the computer thinks is the best of Steam Rocket, but this does not happen. Instead, the knight goes to g1, and of course, clearly, the mate is avoided because if the queen goes to h1, it's not even a check. But the advantage of TsiNanFu, look at that, is 6.1, 6.12, even more than before. But only if TsiNanFu plays correctly, and let's see what he's going to do. Rook to d1, not the best move. So the advantage goes down a little bit from 6.1 to 5.1. This is a check. The knight on g1 is lost because what can a white do? Has only one move. Do from king to go to f1 to e2, and then the rook will take the knight. In this case, however, no matter what white might have done, let's move again. You see the white flag in a red circle, meaning that Steam Rocket resigned, so TsiNanFu starts with a victory. After the losses of PG74, it is a nice consolation. And that was the game, and let's give a look now to the overall evaluation of the game. What does the computer think about the game? We'll need one moment to share and make sure we share the correct screen. We don't want to share the wrong screen by mistake of the wrong games. And here we are. Steam Rocket played with accuracy of 85.2 versus 91.1 for TsiNanFu. You see, the game was even more or less until here. Most of the game, there was a very small advantage of TsiNanFu at some point, but it was even more or less. And then suddenly, from completely even, boom, one wrong move, and that was what TsiNanFu needed to win the game. They played as if Steam Rocket had a rating of 1850, quite above TsiNanFu's, versus 2150 for quite above his own 6131. TsiNanFu played as if his rating was 2150, way above his 1483. And let's look at the categories. No brilliances, one great move each of them, one book move. Best moves, 13 versus 11 for TsiNanFu. Excellent, 6 versus 5 for TsiNanFu. Good, 4 versus 3 for Steam Rocket. Inaccuracies, 3 Steam Rocket, 1 TsiNanFu, 2 mistakes each. And that was it. It seemed that the margin was very small, but one bad move combined with poor king safety is what TsiNanFu needed to defeat Steam Rocket. This concludes today's game, today's video. We have one more game that has been completed. We're going to cover the games as we go towards the end. And we'll try to have more programs dedicated commemorating the first anniversary of our channel. As we mentioned before, we have already shown in the previous video an interview with the tournament director of the Queen's Chess Club, Mr. Jay Kleinman. But that's it for now, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks to all the viewers, the subscribers, the likes, and the comments. Something else, if you are interested, you may want to watch the short videos with 3-minute puzzle rushes. They will have had great viewership. But for now, thanks to all of you. This is the YouTube channel grecochess. I'm your host, Harry Lausanesiris. Goodbye.